Right, I've got the agenda up. Is Martin here by any chance?
I've just rung Martin. He's going to be held up for a few minutes, so we might need to do the updates, and then he'll join us for the bit about the London Tenants Manifesto. So
right.
he should be with us in about 10 minutes.
Oh, fair enough. Well, let's kick off anyway now. Yes, Zoom meetings are always a pain. And sooner we start, sooner we finish. Well, welcome everybody to the Spring London Federation of Housing Co-op Spring Forum. I won't spend too much time giving a chair's speech, if I can put it that way. There hasn't been a whole lot happening actually over the last few months, again due to lockdown. I've been attending some meetings related to the community energy groups, seeing if we can get the housing co-ops involved in that. And it's a sort of a matchmaking process, but at the moment there's been very little progress made there. Greg, do you want to give a report?
Yeah, there's a few things to say. I mean, those that know me know I've been tied up with jury service, so I've not been able to chase up people to do bits for this, so the roundup might be a little bit thin. You know, different local authorities are bringing forth different pots of land for development. Some of those, as they've come up, we've looked at and either expressed an interest ourselves or tried to support others that are doing the same. One thing we've clearly not done is done anything to oppose a existing community group that's applying. So in Waltham Forest, we have a couple of sites. I'm not sure if anyone from Sycamore Co-op is here today. They did get invited, but they have put in a bid, which we've not yet heard whether the local authorities accepted us or not. And there's also a community land trust bid on that site. Slightly more worryingly, some authorities have misinterpreted the guidance about community-led housing and have said that the properties they're bringing forward for community-led housing, you can only apply for them if you're a community land trust with a housing association model, which is really not what we want to see for community-led groups, because the idea that others should be barred from that, it really isn't helpful. Nevertheless, there's a group that we supported with the information on that that is essentially trying to set up a community land trust to provide land for housing co-ops. Where that's going to go, we've yet to see. But on new housing project, oh, is there anyone here from Rising Sun Co-op down in Peckham? So I wasn't able to chase people up quite so much as I might have liked. It's another group which is trying to take over a pub and associated land that they'd been renting. The landlord wants to sell it, and they're putting in a bid. They're supported by the community-led housing hub. Both Rising Sun, Sycamore, Quaggy, and one other that I don't remember, will be doing a talk for the community-led housing hub on the 21st of April for anyone that would like to find out more specifically about those. But essentially there are small developments going ahead, and we will be providing much information as possible, but obviously things are happening more slowly during the lockdown, so I've got no more than that to say. Housing Association Management Co-op, so I was hoping Niall was going to report on that, but I see we've got Mark, Alan and Steve in Lancashire. Could either of you give a bit of an update on what's happening with the management agreements there?
Yeah, I can do the one that we're doing with Hexagon. I think.
Yeah.
Mark has presented himself because he's on the board of Hexagon, but there are a network. There are, I think, a network in the Hexagon. We're currently going through a fairly, I mean, it's going fairly smoothly, but it's quite a painful process in the sense that we're page by page draft, a 70-page draft agreement. Are other people getting a big echo like I am?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I'm just trying to mute the people that I'm seeing noise coming from. But if everyone could mute if they're not speaking, please, it would be a great help.
Okay, shall I try again?
Please.
I'll just pick up from where I left off. So it's going fairly smoothly with their resident involvement officer, a guy called Brian Hughes, who's taking the lead on it. And we've made a number of changes in some detail. That's why it's a bit painful. You have to almost go through everything page by page and look at various words and examine words. So we're about halfway through now. I anticipate this will take another 3 months to get to the end of this agreement. We're on about page 45, I think, and we've just done all the finance stuff, but we've got some other chunky bits to do. And then I think we'll do a review. We are, as a group, thinking that when we get to the end of doing this draft, that we will need to get some kind of legal or technical advice just to check what we're doing, because most of us are volunteers and lay people in terms of what management agreements might look like. So so I think that will happen around June, July time when we'll need to do that. And we've made a tiny bit of provision in terms of if we have to pay somebody for advice, but we haven't made any formal decision. And I think the other key thing to note, Greg, if I may, is that that actually what HECMAF, that's what we call ourselves, this network, are doing is we're drafting something not on behalf of everybody, because when we finish this process, Hexagon has to then go off. We don't have any authority as HECMAF to do things on behalf of individual co-ops. So, and there are probably 1 or 2 co-ops that haven't been very actively involved in this process of the 9. And so what Hexagon has to do at the end of what they're doing with us, and I expect they might try a bit of a steamroller approach, saying, well, we've done it, we've been through all this over 6 or 7 months with HECMAF, and so you individual co-ops should pick, you know, should agree to what we've agreed with them. But I think we've left it that, you know, we've made it very clear throughout the process that in the end it's for an individual co-op to sign the management agreement. This group has come together because we've learned quite a lot from each other and our differing experiences. So I hope that's fairly clear, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, could you just explain, there was a feeling that you were going to be steamrolled to an extent with some new terms that wouldn't be helpful. Has that materialized, or is that?
No, I don't think so myself, but again, Celia's been involved in some of these negotiations. As I say, Mark hasn't, so she might have a comment, but that's why I think when we get to the end of this process, we're going to want somebody to look at it with fresh eyes and say, oi, you've left yourself open. There was one area on finance we've just covered where we thought Hexagon had got it completely wrong because of VAT liability. But generally, Brian Hughes, who's leading on this for Hexagon, has generally just agreed to what we said had to happen. There's been 1 or 2 other areas where he hasn't agreed to what we were proposing. But again, from where I sit, I don't think they've been particularly major.
Okay.
I can report on the, sorry, I hope that it's not too boomy. I'm in a very empty office here. So this is Mark Allen, and I'm reporting on a recent negotiation of the management agreement with Optivo, where there are about 10 managing agents, most of whom are co-ops, some of which have their own properties as well as being managing agents. There was a fear of steamrollering in this relationship. They wanted to do it quite quickly, and we did manage to do it over a period of just a few months. Actually, the manager from Optivo was pretty reasonable and engaged with us in detail. and we made a lot of improvements to the agreement. And one key thing was this VAT issue. So the issue there is whether a managing agent is providing a VATable service to the housing association, or whether they are, whether we're receiving the rent and then passing some of the rent on to the housing association. And it's the latter that where we've ended up with Optivo. So that was very valuable for, in particular, larger groups that would be over the VAT limit in terms of what they retain. So that has happened. I think most of the groups have now signed the new management agreement. So that's been completed, and it does feel like, at least with that manager in charge, there's a positive relationship with co-ops and that very large housing association.
Fantastic. Celia?
Sorry, Greg.
Oh,
the chair. You're the secretary. Celia?
Sorry, I just had to unmute, and I apologise for my camera being broken. I haven't got anything to add to what Steve said about the management agreement with Hexagon, except perhaps that I've been a little bit surprised at how willing they seem to be to make the changes that, or most of the changes that we required, and I think they do recognise that a lot of people have put a lot of work in before we suggested the changes. But apart from that, I've got nothing to add. I thought it was a very full report.
Do you want to?
Can I say something, please?
Sorry, there's somebody before you.
Okay.
John LG, do you want to come in?
Just to say that Network did announce to us, two managing agents in Islington, us and Alamo Housing Co-op, that they were reviewing the management agreement for clarity's sake, but we've heard nothing since their initial sort of announcement of that. I think they've gone sort of off-piste, so to speak. Yeah. But I will report anything if we hear from them. But they haven't even asked us for input particularly, so they're much further behind the Optivo and Hexagon in that respect. That's all.
Okay, you can come in now.
Thank you. I'm Jo Hillier, and I'm representing LFSA. And I just wanted to refer back to what Mark was saying about the situation with Optivo, because we have two major problems with Optivo. One concerns allowances, because 2016 to 17, 2017 to 18, they reduced our allowances when rents went down, which didn't conform with the management agreement. We raised it at the time, and eventually 2018 to 19, they did correct it, but they didn't refund us what we'd missed out on. And they didn't take into account, when they calculated the next year's allowances, what the allowances for the two previous years should be. So we are still getting an allowance which is below the level of what it should be. It's all, their allowances are already very low, certainly compared with Hexagon's allowances. We manage exactly the same number of homes for Hexagon and for Optivo, 26 for each. And Hexagon pays us nearly £9,000 more to manage those 26 homes. We've raised this with them, and they have absolutely refused to give any ground on it whatsoever. We have found the manager absolutely unresponsive to this. The second issue is over boiler replacements. Now, the management agreement with Optivo says that Optivo is responsible to replace boilers. We are responsible for all the gas safety work and the maintenance work. Now, this winter, replacing boilers has been an absolute disaster. We have been waiting weeks for consent. So tenants have been left without heating and hot water because Optivo, well, I don't really know why it takes them such a long time. They can't tell us themselves. In the end, we had to make an official complaint to get one boiler replaced. We've been waiting months to be reimbursed 3 months, the third boiler we had to replace for them. Instead of reimbursing us, they sent us an invoice for it. So we haven't found it to be good at all. And we told them that in future, we wanted them to replace the boilers. We would just tell them when they needed replacing. They said, we can't do that because we have a 5-star arrangement with our contractor, which means it's all or nothing. So if you want us to replace the boilers, we're going to have to do everything. And we said, no, what we want is what the management agreement says. We want you to replace the boiler. But they're absolutely refusing to even contemplate that. And they have introduced a boiler protocol without consultation, which says it doesn't form part of the management agreement, so I'm not clear what status it has, but it says that if the boiler is less than 15 years old, we have to pay a contribution towards the cost of replacing it. And it also says they won't pay us more to replace a boiler than they would pay themselves if they were doing it, despite the fact that, as far as we know, they don't have a separate price for replacing boilers. So, you know, our experience of them is not the same as Mark's.
I'd just like to say,
so
I have the same issue that Joe is raising there. That is something that is a problem with Optivo. So not all is good in that particular department. I realized there was something else which I think is maybe of general interest, which is about who the responsible person is in terms of building safety, in particular fire safety, where Optivo are insisting that the managing agent is that because we have day-to-day control of the property. I think different associations are taking different views on that. So Hexagon, for instance, are not taking that view. And this is something where I think it would be useful if we co-ops can put our heads together on this. I know ownership co-ops presumably are the responsible person, but how you get the right skills to do that and to feel that you have assurance on that is an open question. So that might be something to either discuss now or put on the agenda for the future.
I see Martin Dumont has joined the meeting at the moment, so I'm willing to go back to the London Tenants Manifesto and we can discuss the TMO issues later on in the meeting. So Martin, I'll move over to you.
Well, I'll be brief because actually I've just found the TMO Housing Association TMO stuff absolutely fascinating. And to be fair, in a strict co-op sense, there isn't too much in relation to the London Tenants Fed. To say, I sit on the London Tenants Fed as a rep from the London Federation of Housing Co-ops. God, how many years ago now? It must have been 2019, I think. We were in discussion about what we were going to do for the sort of annual conference forum event that they normally have. And everyone seemed to be, you know, sort of coming up with something new and original. It wasn't just a general moan about the state of council housing and the continued decline. And somebody came up with this idea, well, why don't we try and write a manifesto, like a wish list of everything we'd want to see in council housing, saying, well, we started at 60 years and then we reduced it down to, I think it was 30 years or 25 years. So what we'd want to see. So basically in a quite perfect world. So to that end, we thought, well, the only way we could do this really was to basically get people into the conference to divide themselves up amongst sort of topics and for them to come up with the content of this manifesto, which is what they did. And I think there are 5 chapters. It's a while ago since I read it. But we were looking, the one I was doing with one other person was to look at accountability and the whole issue around sort of tenant engagement and participation. I mean, the long and short of it is, I mean, we came up with actually an awful lot of raw material, which got sort of edited and whittled down into this tenant manifesto, this document, which we circulated out. I'd urge people to read it, although it's largely based around, you know, local authority and strictly sort of council tenants. There is some overlap with housing association tenants, but there isn't too much with co-ops because that isn't really where it was sort of headed in the end. But I mean, the thing that really was the wish of it was to get some traction and to see if we could get some sort of change, or at least open a debate, or at least, you know, sort of see if we could sort of reignite the debate about the future and all the positive aspects of social housing. I mean, the one thing I would report is, to that end, within the last, when was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we got a request to have a sort of, well, I would say sit-down meeting, but a face-to-face meeting with an all-party parliamentary group. And to that end, I think there's 3 of us meeting Stephen Timms. I think it's in a couple of weeks' time, or next week maybe, to discuss the manifesto. So it's also had some quite good reviews in the housing press, and almost generally all the feedback we've had sort of individually has been pretty good. So fingers crossed, it's a small start to perhaps getting social housing back on the agenda and away from this completely and utterly ridiculous cul-de-sac of home ownership being the answer to all our problems. Can we get back to TMOs?
Fair enough. I'll take questions on that. Does anybody have any questions to Martin?
Yeah,
no?
yeah, quick.
Oh, hang on, there was one.
Oh, okay.
Mike Roberts, you're muted.
He's muted.
You're muted, Mike.
Yeah,
he's not now.
I wasn't going to clarify anything on the TMO situation, but it was earlier on safety. But I'll come back to that.
Jane?
Sorry, just quickly, Martin, you mentioned an APPG group. What's the APPG group on?
Well, I presume it's on council housing. I mean, I got drafted in quite late. Stephen Timms is the guy we're meeting from it. Now, I know Stephen Timms slightly from old, because when I worked in Newham on TMOs, we were doing a project in his patch, really, which is Little Ilford. So I'm assuming that, and he always had quite an interest in that, so I'm assuming that that's a good point of contact. But I'm not really sure, because I wasn't aware there was an APPG specifically on social housing. So, well, either it's new or it's been dormant. But I mean, they got in contact with us, which I thought was a good sign, rather than us trawling around. So I'm literally off the back of obviously him and a couple of other people reading this manifesto. So we'll say, I think it's next Wednesday. We're having an hour or 45-minute Zoom conversation with the hope that that's going to go somewhat further. So, I mean, if you get any news on that, I mean, obviously I can get back to everybody.
I've just had a look online. I think he's the vice chair for the APPG on ending homelessness.
Oh, is he? Well, hopefully. Go on.
There is a council one as well.
Yeah. I see no more questions from that particular item, so we'll again go to Shortlife Housing Co-ops and empty homes. Who wants to kick up or resume the debate there?
So you're going back to the Housing Association Management Co-ops?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll do the Shortlife when we're finished, yeah.
Yeah. Martin?
Well, first, apologies for being late. I have to say, with my COVID head on, I completely forgot about today. So never mind. But one of the things I was interested in is the status of the management agreements between these housing associations and these managing agents, because I've assumed they're not covered by a right to manage, in which case their legal status, I presume, is legal, but fundamentally would have to be enforced in a court, being there probably no dispute resolution mechanism. I mean, the idea of implementing allowance cuts without following anything in the management agreement isn't something that would be confined to housing associations. I know at least 2 examples where local authorities have done that. Camden did it, and so did Lambeth once. So, you know, it's not unheard of in the what I would say was the more regulated sector. But yeah, I mean, exactly under what basis are these management agreements drawn up?
I'm just saying, does anybody want to answer? Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. My sense is that what Hexagon did when they presented us with this draft, Martin, is that they took a while to do it, and they said they'd send it over to their lawyers. So they certainly gave us the impression that they'd taken legal advice. When we eventually got the document, it was cut and pasted in an extraordinary way. And if they did take legal advice, they really wasted their money, it seemed to us. But there are sections in it which does have things about conflict resolution, both with the co-op and the association, although we haven't got to that bit yet. And there are other bits that certainly have bits of legalese, but the whole document was really poorly formatted and numbered. And so
it's not taken from the standard modular management agreement for tenant management co-ops under the right to manage them?
I've no idea. I mean, the driving force for Hexagon, and we were partly driving it as well, was that I was going to say was that the agreement we had was about 20 years old that we're working to, and of course, given the legislative changes since, it's way out of date. And we started nagging Hexagon, saying this needs updating. We didn't nag too hard because generally, I think most of us thought things were going all right. But the other point I just want to make, which is slightly off that point, I didn't want to give the impression that everything with Hexagon is wonderful and rosy. If other people think they're a great housing association, we have to keep our eyes on them. And we've particularly had to have a go at them over the years about their capital works program. They've been really badly organized at doing kind of consulting with us and then inspecting works of capital works. And I think, again, they've wasted huge amounts of money, public money, doing that. And secondly, we've more recently had a go at them because and it was acknowledged by Brian Hughes at the meeting last week, that their finance department is all over the place and doesn't send out invoices to us in an appropriate and timely fashion. They want all sorts of information from us, a bunch of volunteers primarily, within 7 working days and this and that. And we said, okay, well, we want the same from you, the same kind of service from you. So there is work still to be done with Hexagon to make them more efficient in certain areas. Thanks.
Mike, you wanted to come in? Mike Roberts. And then John.
Oh, no, I was just going to go back to a couple of points which were raised as you and I are both local members in various different guises. I think I was very concerned, as I have been locally in my own neck of the woods, of people being left from housing associations without heat and water, and nobody's allowed to do that. I think it's the 1936 Public Health Act at all. It's a legal requirement that you have to have water and heat. And I think people should rattle the cage of the local authority, wherever it is, to actually intervene if necessary on that side. The other thing I was going to draw attention to was we've just reached, I think, Friday, the 41st day of Grenfell assessment, and most of it has been looking at fire and safety. And then we have the new Hackett Act, which is coming and being enforced shortly, and that's will, I think, take us to a new level of what is going to have to be required, quite rightly so, by not only housing associations and local authorities, but also by co-ops as well. I think it will be very useful if maybe at some stage of just thinking out loud that not just because the Grenfell inquiry is going to go on for some more time, and there will be massive implications from the outpourings of that one, but I think it might be useful to have some sort of briefing for all co-ops in relationship to what is going to be expected of them in relationship to the Hackett Act. And I will be, hopefully, because I know her, the chief executive of the social housing regulator. She used to be the chief executive of the local mental health trust. So my relationship with her, as it were, goes back some time, and she's been given the job by MCLG to actually come up with requirements to actually judge housing associations and others against, and that probably will include co-ops as well. So I think there is a need, I think there is a gap there that I think in some form we must bring everybody up to speed on, I think, because there will be legal implications coming fairly rapidly over the next few months.
Mick, if I may, I just want to reinforce Mike's last point. Certainly in our discussions with Hexagon about...
Sorry, Stephen, is there somebody else before you?
Oh, I didn't think there was. I thought
come in.
Another blue hand, sorry. I can only see...
Yes. Just on the origin, Martin, of certain management agreements, ours was negotiated at the time between ourselves and Network, or Stadium as was. Currently, they are pushing through the fire safety regime quite strongly, which is a good thing, but in typical Network style, not very efficiently. In fact, everything they do is inefficient, but they do continue to pay us quite a reasonable allowance. So we're okay with them at the minute, but we'll sort of I will report back should I get any further communications from them as to sort of about renegotiating our current agreement. That's all I'd like to say.
Yeah. Stephen, you can come in now.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. I just wanted to reinforce Mike's last point, because certainly in our to and froing with Hexagon, we've had quite a time in the past year or so around this issue of requirements and compliance in the light of the Grenville and the Hackett legislation. And certainly as volunteers, we're questioning what Hexagon are trying to put onto us rather than their response, instead of their responsibility. So I think if we had a session or part of a meeting which looked at those requirements, I think that, because the devil will be in the detail in these management agreements, I think. So I think that's an important matter. Thank you.
Okay. It's right between Mike and Martin now, whichever of you gets in first. Martin?
Well, firstly to say, historically speaking, it's disappointing Hexagon, considering, you know, Wendy Newell's involvement with them. And I mean, Wendy was involved when I was in the LFHC and writing the original management agreement for tenant management co-ops, her and David Rogers and Winkworth and Pemberton, and which formed the basis of the one that went on, you know, that we rewrote in 2005. I mean, in some ways, I don't know where to start. Just the more and more I keep thinking about the implications of this, the worse it gets, really. Because, I mean, tenant management within a local authority context, you know, in the end became a really, really technical, and as somebody just said, the devil is definitely in the detail in the management agreements. And the finances are paramount, you know, disaggregating the housing revenue account, which I did in Newark once with their head of finance, was absolutely fascinating. But I mean, a bunch of housing associations attempt to do it off their own back. I mean, it's absolutely quite frightening, especially as you say, you throw in fire safety implications. I mean, perhaps there should be some move, you know, to drag this sort of ad hoc bolting together of non-expertise under something like the right to manage rent. You know, at least they should be forced to follow the modular management agreement. At least that was drawn up with some degree of expertise and understanding the issues involved. I mean, the more I hear about this, the worse it sounds. It's awful.
Okay. Mike, you wanted to come in?
I always get this problem with unmuting, or quite the opposite around stuff I do locally. Fail to actually mute at the right time. No, I think there is so much coming down the tracks, let's put it that way, that those of us who are plugged into all this information, etc., are just standing back and just saying, well, at some stage we're going to have to put this together and we're going to have to come forward with responses to how we view what the implications are and on a cost basis and implementation, who does the implementation as well, and who's responsible for that. And I think people's concerns about management agreements are certainly well made in relationship to the co-op sector and similar sectors. At the moment, the chief executive of the social care regulator has been given almost the instruction of drawing up national standards to actually apply. There are, you know, as I've taken one of my housing associations to her body before she was appointed, 4 times I took, and basically there was nothing I could manage it against in relationship to the responses from them. But now there will be, she will have to draw up with her team standards to be applied to everything that she judges, etc. That will be very helpful, but that may come at a cost as well. So we're in this very interesting area of loads coming down the track, but as regards how it's all going to fit together and what are the costs, the implications, etc. It's very hazy at this particular point in time, but it's something everybody should be aware of.
Right, Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the Hexagon are offering an updated version of the modular agreement that Martin is referring to, but the other associations in general are not. That's partly because that modular agreement is very long and complex, and it can be hard to see the wood for the trees in it. And that's why it's more than 100 pages. So it was a very careful job back in the 90s, but actually it takes a lot of reading. And it was tended not to be referred to over long periods of time. Certainly my co-op wasn't fully kind of, it didn't have it at its fingertips, let's say. In terms of the responsibilities of who's responsible for building safety, Optivo have referred us to the wording of the 2005 building safety order, and it does seem to make the manager responsible for that, but obviously the level of responsibility now post Grenfell is a very different beast, and having the expertise to adequately carry that out as a competent person sourcing that is an issue for us. So I agree completely with Mike. We need to be dealing with this so that when the new act comes in, we're discharging our responsibilities adequately.
Okay.
Sorry, can I say something? We can't work out how to raise a hand. Another issue we have with Optivo actually is over the cost of fire risk assessments, because they have been doing them for communal areas in some of our homes, and they are now passing those on as service charges to tenants. And in some cases that adds an extra £4 a week to people's rent on top of the rent increase. And in our view, it is a landlord's responsibility. It should not be passed on to tenants anyway. And if that is inevitable, then it should be spread out over the period between fire risk assessments, not all put on in the course of 1 year. Also, they haven't actually consulted about it, and their own service charge policy says that they will not introduce a new variable service charge without first consulting tenants. And I think tenants should have the right to object. They should have the right to write to their MP or their local authority or whatever to object before being charged for a fire risk assessment, which is the landlord's responsibility.
Martin, you wanted to come in, your hand is still up.
Oh, just a couple of things, just an observation in relation to I mean, there really does appear to be some sort of regulatory framework required for this sort of deal with housing associations, because obviously part of the deal and the right to manage is the group involved are taken through the process of building the management agreement. That's why it's modular. So that, you know, you certainly, hopefully you get to, and I can't always say that's true for the local authority, but certainly you as the group get to know the management agreement in a certain amount of detail in order to basically manage it day to day. So, you know, I mean, if you're just coming up with something they've sent off to lawyers and then it's just dumped on you and you have to, I mean, it's just completely inadequate for something as quite complex as managing a housing service. So the whole thing does need to, I think, be, I mean, if they're basically running right to manage without a regulatory framework, I mean, it's, you know, it's a recipe for disaster, isn't it? The other thing to say is, I mean, in relation to fire safety, yeah, I mean, that seems to be fairly clear. You know, it's a landlord's responsibility. You know, I would say that it is complicated slightly, having, you know, been on both sides of the fence. And when I managed Godwin and Crowndale for a bit, I mean, no one knows the estate better than the people who are managing it. So, you know, sometimes you need to work out a way of perhaps building those two things together. But, you know, I mean, Grenfell has thrown up some quite interesting stuff in relation to that. And as far as I'm concerned, the answer is in some ways partly still to go back to what we used to have, which was, you know, put the experts in charge, which is when, you know, when we did Carpenter's TMO in Newham, I remember talking to the borough commander, you know, because they were 22 stories high. And basically, you know, they used to come around every year and assess everything and give us a complete report, and nothing could happen unless that was signed off, you know, and we sort of took that function away. I mean, after Lacknell House happened in Southwark, I remember talking to the borough commander in Lambeth, around concerns that tenants arranged for me on one of my TMOs there, which was Holland Rise, which is 20 odd stories. And I asked him if stay put was still the advice. And he actually said, well, yeah, off the record, but I'd never say that to you in public, on the basis that we haven't got a clue what you lot have been up to since we last had a proper look at them, you know, which is the problem the Lacknell House raised, you know, and they completely altered the design of it. So, I mean, you know, I mean, in some ways, I think the answer is simple. And the other thing that slightly worries me is I missed the regulatory discussion that CCH had the regulator. But listening to Mike, I mean, if they're moving down this sort of track, it makes me wonder. I mean, my co-op, which is a registered provider, was looking to deregister, mainly because the regulatory framework, you know, as is now, you know, was completely unsuited to a small housing co-op. I got the impression that actually they'd be quite happy to see most of us disappear. I mean, which, you know, is a bit of a double-edged sword. But I mean, what does that mean in relation to large associations? Do they still have the ability to opt out of any regulatory framework if they just turn themselves over into development vehicles?
Mike, do you want to come in on that one? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, what Fiona's been tasked to do is is actually draw up the national standards with MCHLG, and I can't remember what the framework of timescale. And I think one should operate. My own advice would be one should operate on the basis of what is coming rather than what is current. And you know, the government's already been offsided with regard to what happened at Grenfell and other places, and I think it wouldn't want to have something of a tragedy nature occur again on that particular scale. I think nobody would, but I don't, you know, I haven't seen what the timescales are. But if you don't have national standards which you judge these things by currently, plus the Hackett Acts as well, then you know, that is not going to take a long period of time. It's going to have to be done fairly smoothly and fairly quickly, but not quick like the odd few months' time. It's going to have to be well detailed and well argued. And I think at the moment, you know, there is nothing coming forward with regard to timescales. But if I was everybody here, as it would be for local authorities, would say, you know, you really need to think about what the landscape is likely to be in the immediate future, whenever the immediate future is, whether it's 6 months, 9 months or so, rather than what the immediate future is currently.
Mark, you wanted to come in again? No. Anybody else want to make a contribution to this debate? No, in which case then we'll move on to the next. Greg, you want to give a report on Shortlife?
Yes, thanks. As a few people here will know, we've been trying to work with some Shortlife groups and people representing guardian groups to try and find some options around sort of meantime housing that's being managed that isn't ready for permanent occupation. Across the capital, we've seen that a lot of councils have been using guardian groups in the sort of hope that it removes all legal responsibility from them. But the courts have been ruling in a number of cases that that's actually quite a risk to take. And
they're talking about Shortlife.
And so just a couple some of the guardian groups have simply gone into liquidation to avoid the fines that arise, which can in some cases be passed on to housing association landlords, or possibly even in some circumstances councils. And people have been generally felt that putting an intermediary landlord would protect them from that. That's clearly not the case, as the courts have shown. So this has been a good time to start looking at whether we can promote Shortlife co-ops as a back into the niche that they had for many years, as the existing co-ops have actually got quite a good record of handing properties back on time, avoiding litigation, avoiding trouble for the councils, as long as the relationships are maintained. So Ron's here, he's working with a group in Croydon called my brain's gone, sorry.
Plumtree.
They're one of the ones that are taking Croydon Council to court for a number of regulatory failings. But one of the things to promote this that we're trying to put forward is having a standard form of agreement that, in the same way that we're saying this, it would be useful to have a standard management agreement for housing association management co-ops. The idea that each time a group wants to negotiate an agreement with the council, an individual housing officer does not want to take on the personal professional risk of saying this is a good agreement. If we have one pan-London model agreement that is approved, we're hoping to be approved by the GLA, that would obviously give an awful lot of reassurance to any individual council officer that's considering entering into an agreement. So we're sort of monitoring the impact on existing guardian arrangements, what's going on through the courts. We're trying to provide some publicity materials to share essentially co-ops good, guardians bad, without necessarily slandering any individual organisations, except for Watchtower, which I believe is entirely appropriate to slander. Quite difficult to slander. It's difficult to actually say anything that's not fair and reasonable, I think. This might be helped by changes to planning guidance, which was going to make it easier to use commercial properties for housing. I'm hoping Jane's going to jump in on that, because I was going to try and summarise some things that she's shared, but as she's here, she could say it better than me. But the final thing
I'm happy to hear you, Greg. Go.
The final thing I was going to say, though, is in order to do this, we do need real buy-in from the Shortlife co-ops. We've had 3 meetings so far, and although some people have attended, some co-ops have argued a little bit amongst themselves about who should represent them. So the keen person hasn't attended, and then neither has the person that was supposed to attend. Had a meeting yesterday where the co-ops were expected to attend didn't attend. I know because of jury service I've not been able to ring up and chase and twist arms, but to keep moving ahead we really do need to be aware that there's going to be some real buy-in and participation from those groups. So essentially we're making some progress. It's slow, there's possibilities. Even though we know that short life housing is not the option that we would choose for many people, it would be an improvement for people in situations of living as guardians, as we said before. That's all I've got to say on C.
Any questions for Greg on that? Mike, you have your hand up. I assume it's... Yeah. Yeah, just to reiterate, there will be, we probably know more in the summer, I suspect, but there will be in London anyway, a significant amount of office type property vacant. And it's likely to be a permanent situation. But as you've said, there will be these conversions into domestic properties might be tried. But then again, 500,000 people have left London for Europe. So there could be a significant amount of empty property coming on the market, or not on the market, becoming available in the next 6 months. I'm certainly getting the impression in my travels around the place that there's an awful lot of empty property out there. And more is going to appear on the radar in the next while. So there are opportunities for short life housing co-ops and for housing co-ops, etc. In general to look at investing in acquiring more properties. The market rents, I think, in London have fallen by 20% this year, and are expected to continue to fall. So if the rental income drops, well, then the price of the properties will drop. So it might be worthwhile contacting the GLA if you haven't already, if you want to develop and acquire more properties. There are grants available now, and there's a limited time for these grants being available. I think they run up until March 2022, if I'm correct. Anyway, that's enough I have to say about that item. And then we move on to item D,
okay,
the housing panel.
I'm just going to say one quick thing on HAMCs before the idea of there being a regulatory framework. Until 5 or 6 years ago, the group of management co-ops with housing associations were an almost uniquely London situation, and they were invisible. I had a number of arguments with people who said that that type of co-op simply did not exist. And I had to sort of reassure people, yes, they do exist. And there's at least a dozen, and maybe more if you include short life co-ops. It's actually a group which is of a not insignificant size, and they're not just a curiosity. It means moving forwards, they're probably not featuring too highly on anybody else's radar. So it may be that we could do some work on a common approach, but whether that would feature in the housing regulators' vision, other than them agreeing that it would be a nice thing that we did for them, I'm not sure that there's anything else that will happen there. Final thing to mention here is the London Housing Panel. I think it's been quite good for the profile of London Fed to be part of the panel which feeds into the Mayor's Housing Committee. It's covered quite a range of things. It's been quite key during the lockdown to share the number of different things being done by the community groups that make it up. They've published that on the website. It's not going to be published as a paper document now, unfortunately. But it's made up of not just like the London Federation of Housing Co-ops and London Tenants Federation, but legal advice groups, special interest groups, LGBT, battered women's shelters, empty homes agencies, Generation X, Generation Rent rather. It's key thing at the moment being addressed, I would say, is about temporary accommodation and the difficulties of not just getting people into temporary accommodation, but meeting the needs of people in substandard accommodation. We all see on those strange bailiffs reality TV programs where they go around and evict people from an overcrowded accommodation. If you're the person that's supposed to be supporting those people, arranging for people to be put on the street is not really a good solution to their housing issues. So we're dealing with a number of those issues, and obviously as part of that with empty properties, we're trying to Action on Empty Homes is one of the other partners in the Shortlife group that we're trying to push forwards. So there was a danger that the funding for the panel would end, which would be a disappointment because we're partway through pushing forward on a number of different issues. This really is our sort of best feed in to talk to Tom Copley, the Deputy Mayor for Housing Matters, and Sadiq Khan on issues around this, instead of queuing up with all of the other lobby groups. They're actually paying for us to sit there and twist their arms. So it's not confirmed. They did say that their funding was going to end. There's going to be another meeting about it, and we're quite positive that it's going to be extended for another year. If we can ensure that we actually push through and make some real difference on that over the next year, then that channel of communication will stay open. It's not something I can say there are these clear projects that are going ahead. It really is to continue to feed back on the various policies, on how we feel the planning changes are working out. But we do seem to be getting listened to. It's just difficult to point to any actual change that we've made. Any questions on that? I'm a bit floundering for what to say, because the news that I expected to give you was that the London Housing Panel was going to finish. It might well not be finishing now, and so we're sort of revising the plan of work going ahead. So I'm trying to be more positive without having anything clear to say at the moment. Any questions?
No. Sorry, Mark, you wanted to come in?
Yes, if it does go ahead for another year, do you need suggestions of positive things for that work plan, or do you think you've got what you need?
Well, London Fed is one of 15 organisations taking part, so we can put things forward. There is an issue. I'm not going to make a note of this in the notes I'm writing down, but Trust for London co-funds it, and they're quite keen that we don't overload the GLA officers. They can act a little bit like a filter. We need to work quite hard to make sure that things don't get watered down, but there's a fairly clear channel of what we can put through it and what we can't, and some of it really is responding to GLA questions. But for things going forward, they tend to be the things that we have allies with amongst the panel. So things that are joint LTF and London Fed and 2 or 3 of the other groups are a lot easier to push forwards and put on the agenda. And people have started to realise that for the London Housing Panel to stay relevant, they do need to be bringing those things forward, and they need to stop knocking them out of the minutes and such like. So I think, it's been going for 2 years now. It's coming together and it's gelling, but these are things that in any organisation like this, you do need to work through and establish what you can and can't achieve. So, but it is positive, it is.
Right, is there any other questions to Greg on this item? No. Then we move on to item three, introductions, new housing co-ops.
I've certainly got some new faces. I'm not sure how many from existing co-ops and how many are from new ones, but this was for new groups setting up really a chance to say what you need, where you might need help. Some of the discussions that we don't normally follow up in the pub after a meeting that obviously we can't do now. A couple of people have said in the chat that they're new co-ops setting up, but I'm not going to put them on the spot, but encourage them to just introduce themselves.
Hi.
Hi.
We are starting to look into setting something up, but we're in very, very early stages. We're looking at a site in Charlton currently that could be used for meanwhile use. It's currently an industrial site, and quite a few of us are from the construction industry, architecture and things like that. So we've been wanting to do something different for a while, something that will really serve the community. And we're just in the very beginning stages of research of how to set this up, essentially.
It's interesting.
You're quite near to me then. I'm in Greenwich at the moment, so it'd be interesting to talk about some of those sites. I've seen a few walking around, so.
Yeah, that would be great to pick your brain about them, for sure.
Is there anybody else who wants to come in on this item?
Can I come in?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Marvell from Brockley Tenants Co-op. I've only just started there. I've literally been there just before Easter, so there's been I've lost several days anyway. So I think I've been there about 2 weeks. And again, it might be useful for me to get in touch with the person from Greenwich and Tia, because we're quite near to them. So maybe worth us linking up at some stage.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, you can use the chat to exchange ideas, or you can, to exchange emails and contact numbers.
Okay.
Or you can refer them to the London Fed, and we can put the two of you together.
Yeah, I'll put my details down on the chat.
Yeah. Ray, can you make sure you copy the chat and save it?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Someone is recording. I'd meant to ask about recording it myself, but I didn't because I thought this was going to be a shorter meeting than our last one. Could you just ask who it is that's been recording?
Well, I haven't heard anything particularly controversial at the meeting.
Oh, no,
yeah.
We'll leave that to you, Greg.
No, if we want to have a copy of it, I'm just wondering who to ask.
Well, no one's somebody could inadvertently have the recording thing on.
Yeah. Okay, that's.
And not know it. So.
If anyone leaves and it says that you've been recording, feel free to send us the link to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on Blaze's Zoom account. If he may have set it up to auto record, but it doesn't at this end say I'm recording. But if it comes through to me, Greg, I'll let you have it.
No. Martin, you want to speak?
It's just on the issue of new co-ops. I mean, I don't know if this has got much traction, but it's something that I got thinking about. And I had a conversation with Martin Holmes at Bunker about the deals that are currently offered. I mean, my co-op was offered 2 sites in Waltham Forest to look at, etc. And they were both on leasehold deals. And I was talking to Martin about his deal with Brighton, and that's also a leasehold deal, although at the moment it's 99, but they're trying to get it up to 250. And I was just suddenly struck by the notion of co-ops and the way in which they, well, one, to do with the financing these deals in terms of them being leases rather than freeholds. but also this whole idea that actually the new generation of co-ops won't be freeholders by the looks of it from these deals. I mean, I talked to Waltham Forest and said, if your concern was to basically keep the land in public ownership and you don't want to lose an asset and all the rest of it, I mean, in relation to keeping it in the social benefit, if you transferred it to, you know, by selling it to us or giving it to us as a fully mutual housing co-op, then yeah, you won't lose it. It will stay in public ownership for good. But one of the things that struck me about this was when my co-op finished paying off its mortgage and we got the deeds, I was trawling through one of our houses and there's a record back there to 1896 where some impoverished aristos' remainder of their land was being parcelled up, and you can see the little plots flogged off to, you know, and nascent developers, you know, early Wimpies or whatever, where these two, you know, Edwardian, Victorian, late Victorian houses we've got stand now. And I was sort of aware then really that what's happened certainly to co-ops of my generation is, you know, an interesting passing over of what was you know, originally landowners' land, you know, over to the peasantry, you know, via us developing co-ops. Now, you know, English land law is still one of the bloody problems in this country because it's fundamentally medieval, and you literally are a peasant or a landlord. You know, leasehold is a complete racket, as people are finding out in relation to fire safety and everything else, you know, and a way of guaranteeing an income stream, you know, for the landlord. I'm rather worried that the new generation of co-ops won't enjoy the benefits of what's been, when you think about it, certainly co-ops in London, a quiet revolution of passing land from, as I say, you know, impoverished aristocrats, you know, into the hands of a bunch of, you know, originally quite, you know, disparate quasi-revolutionary hippie types, you know, basically acquiring all this rather really useful and quite valuable land under, you know, a completely new and quite radical model, which holds it in the public benefit, for, you know, for hopefully time immemorial. Anybody got any more worries about that?
Doesn't seem to be. Case bad
news.
Or was that a different issue? Kate, Unit 11?
No, I thought that it might be me recording by mistake, but I just checked and it said that you have to ask the host to record if you want to record. So it must be one of the hosts, I think.
Ah,
okay. Maybe we set it up for that last time and it's carried over.
Right.
In which case, if anyone, I hope nobody objects to being recorded. A bit late to ask.
Too late now.
Just in relation to the leasehold issue, an awful lot of councils sold properties to the housing associations on leaseholds 40 years ago. These leaseholds are now entering a phase where they need to be renegotiated. And I don't think anybody has actually picked up on this yet. Because they're dropping below I don't know, but I think they're dropping below the number of, I think it was a 125-year-old lease, and they're now reaching the 85-year level where they'll have to be renegotiated if they're going to retain their value. There's no great incentive for the councils to cut a deal with housing associations. The councils can get revenue from this. Well, this is going to be an interesting thing in the next few years. Well, it may affect those of you who live in street level properties as well. So it might be wise to check the length of leases that you have in your properties. Well, and also if you're TMO of a housing association and you're on a street level property, check that as well, because it will affect your rents. It will affect everything. And there could be a chance where properties will be transferred back to council ownership from housing associations, along with the tenants. You never know. There are opportunities coming up from this. There is a paper about this, which I will try and circulate to people if you want to go into this in more detail. I need to get permission off the author, but it is a fascinating little read, if very, very detailed. Is there any more questions on this? No. We then move on to, I presume it's not on the agenda, but since I didn't call it at the beginning of the agenda, any other business? Anybody have any issues they'd like to raise? No. Jane, you wanted to, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that CCH has spotted a briefing from the government that says it intends to extend the Corporate Insolvency Act, which means that people can continue to hold virtual meetings. Now, they haven't actually said they've done it. They said they're going to do it. So I think it's kind of a watch this space. But I put something on the thread on the LFHC Facebook page for you with a link to the document, and it's on the CCH Facebook page as well. It actually was announced on the 16th of February, but it was kept very, very quiet. We had to dig quite deep to find it. But they've not said definitely yet, but it's their intention.
Thanks for that, Jane. Jenny?
Hi, I'm from Vine Housing Co-op. Yeah, on that issue, we've not managed to get our audited accounts in time because of the whole COVID thing. Our auditors were laid low. And yeah, there's an extension of 3 months on all that kind of having online meetings, having audited accounts late, all that kind of registration stuff. Our understanding is that there's been a 3-month extension. But also on a completely different issue is that we are, we're looking to the future and the phasing out of gas boilers. And we just wondered if anyone else in the Fed has been looking into this. We went, I think Greg, you kindly gave me the link to the London Community Energy meeting, which was really interesting. And I've got a piece with crew, and we're considering getting crew, asking crew, paying them to come and do either a webinar or an actual talk, depending on timing, about alternatives for small co-ops in terms of different energy sources. And I just wondered if anybody else had done anything like this, and how you were going if you did.
I sit on a committee in Islington which allocates grants to a community organisation that includes co-ops. I've been trying to encourage co-ops to do this in order to develop what they call innovative energy efficiency measures. That includes solar panels, insulation, batteries, anything you can think of, you can come up with. And we're allocating money of up to 64,000 each to a project. But you have to be based in Islington to do that.
Yeah.
I'm also working on, as regards the boiler situation, at the moment I'm also a local councillor, but I'm also doing a scrutiny into communal energy communal energy schemes and seeing whether they're value for money. Because again, our council, there have been cases where systems of the community energy systems go down and they're out for weeks. And it's a scandal, and something needs to be done about it. So we're looking into that. I'm also working with a TMO, Harry Western TMO in South Islington, with a view to getting them to install, they want to use ground source or air source heat pumps in order to run their communal heating system. Marvelous idea. They originally were trying to get money from the renewable heat incentive schemes, which I think has ended sometime this year. But unfortunately, due again to we put officers in the council, and one officer has been encouraged to take early retirement over this. Again, delaying the scheme of, exaggerating the risks and inflating the expenses of these schemes meant that it wasn't going to go ahead. I feel, when a scheme can go ahead and it's being financed by TMO money and grant money, I feel that the council has no real right to try and block it. It constantly happens. And I expect people in housing association TMOs have the same problem, that when you try and do something, that will benefit the community. Suddenly you get some jobs worth who's saying no. The computer says no, which is extremely frustrating for the residents and does nothing to add value to the properties. But that's something else I'm dealing with. The thing about boilers, I think, bear in mind, Jenny, I think you mentioned it, was the fact that I think in 2025, I think, all boilers, all gas-fired boilers in new properties, you can't put a gas-fired boiler in a new property. Now, I am not too sure, and I need to find out more, whether this applies to replacement of gas-fired boilers as well and combi heating systems, in which case you're going to have to replace them with electric heating systems. At the moment, the way the price of electricity stands, that is a very, very expensive way of heating water, except if you start to look at a more holistic approach, green approach to the heating, etc., in your insulation in your properties, you may need to think about putting solar panels onto the properties, either on the roofs or through canopies.
We've done that.
Yeah, and using grant, etc., as well to reduce the cost of this in order to supply energy. Sorry, can I finish?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, in order to supply your co-ops with a supply of affordable energy. The other key thing to keep in mind about this is that I think most of the councils in London have now signed up for zero carbon by 2030. That's essentially 9 years ago. Now, co-ops, I will expect, or as registered providers, will have to go along with that as well. That is something you need to factor into your cyclical maintenance and asset costs in the future. Jenny, if you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just so thank you. Sorry, Mick. Yeah, absolutely. And these are all the issues that we're looking at the moment. We've put solar panels, we've done loft insulation, and we're looking at how to become zero carbon. And you're absolutely right. At the moment, even heat pumps are really an expensive option for the tenant because electricity is much more expensive than gas. And we've replaced all our gas boilers with high efficiency ones. So yeah, we're just looking where to go next, really. That's
Stephen and Mark.
Sorry, Mick, it's a historic hand. Sorry.
Okay, fair enough. Mike, you have your hand up then?
Yeah, it's a very interesting area, you know, net zero by 2030. The government is looking slightly later, but 2030 is what I think people are going to have to look at. The other area which hasn't been mentioned is about passive house construction. Plymouth have got quite a few hundred of those that they've built. Exeter have built them as well, and other places. So for those who don't know what passive house is, it's obviously a German system. It actually self-heats the house rather than using much conventional heating. And for those who don't like my flat, I always reckon that this flat is early stages of passive house heating, because if it gets slightly cold, you just put on another jumper. As we used to do in the old days, you know, no, but it is you know, the future. If you look at the climate change work which has come from the Climate Change Commission and advises government, it is pretty tough standards, and we've got to get down -78% by 2030, and where, you know, that is a really difficult challenge, and it is COP26 this year. As Greta would say, you know, we've not only got to make the effort, but we've got to make sure that everybody knows that we are making the effort as well, because we'll be judged by it as we're the president.
Martin?
Just a quick one to Jenny. Some while back, through an inexperienced treasurer and auditors balls up. We failed to submit accounts for more than 18 months. In fact, they didn't chase us for something like nearly 18 months, 2 years. So I wouldn't freak out. On the basis we're not recording this, by the way, I'll say that.
Just a little thing on the energy stuff again. There's a paper came out by an economist called Tony Seba. He works through an organization called Rethink X, and it's on the future transition of energy. He's been relatively right on his, I won't go into it, but his predictions and his model he's using has been reasonably accurate over the last few years. He predicted the expansion of electric cars 10 years before it happened and various other things. He's now predicting a huge revolution in the way energy is generated. And again, while it doesn't quite, it's American based and it doesn't quite relate to housing. It's well worth having a read on it if you're interested in this stuff to see what's going to happen in the next 5 or 6 years. I'll also start putting stuff on the website as soon as I get time. And if Greg manages to minute this, so I have something, so I know that I'm supposed to do it, on a report that Islington did 10 years ago on how to basically save 80% of the heating costs and energy costs in a property, a street level property, which I think is becoming more relevant now. And it was roughly working out then at about 16,000 a unit. But when you take out most of that was boiler costs. When you take out that, it looks relatively cheap and affordable. It's mainly insulation. In addition to that, keep in mind that when you replace your windows in a street level property or other places as well with PVC, you don't have to do any cyclical maintenance on these windows for 20 years. This will save you a fortune. And I think maybe this green stuff, how we can use it to save money for both our residents and the co-op, and how we can access grants will be, I think, something for a future, probably in the autumn to coincide with co-op, COP21 forum. People are willing to have that. Yeah. Yes, Martin, you want to come in? And Jenny?
Well, just reinforcing your point on the windows, we've just, we did ours some while ago and it's gone round through our cycle and we saved, well, more than a third, nearly a half on our cyclical, just because we replaced the windows.
I'll keep that in mind and I might put someone I know to contact you over that. Jenny, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just that I would say that we also looked into PVC windows, and the manufacture of PVC windows is really nasty, and they are not, they're not at all a good alternative source. So we actually went for high-end timber ones that are much less wasteful of energy in their manufacture and don't leave residues forever in the environment. So I know, it's more expensive in the short run, but yeah, that was our decision anyway.
I mean, again, it's an ongoing argument. But I mean, the other argument, the argument with timber windows is that you have to repaint them fairly frequently, and then you're using carcinogens to repaint them, and you're also using carcinogens and fairly savage carcinogens and very environmentally harmful chemicals to preserve them. So there's swings and roundabouts on this. There's no one solution that fits everything. Plus, some timbers are teak. They come out of non-renewable sources. So again, have to consider everything. I will try and also get to a future meeting, see if I can get Waverley D8 Housing Co-op along, because they are a recipient of a grant from Islington Council and how to renovate properties. And I think there might be a number of housing co-ops who've received grants from the GLA to do this. And I'll see if I can get one or two of them along to a future GLA, because this is an area I'm quite interested in. And I can see the potential here. Green does not mean higher rents or higher costs. It can also save substantial amounts of money, and this needs to be emphasized, especially when you've seen the way the rate of water rates are rising, and the way gas and electricity prices are going through the roof at the moment and will continue to go through the roof. it's reaching the point now where it's getting far cheaper to do this stuff than to actually continue with the old systems. Well, that said, I see two hands up, John Elgie and Mike Roberts. John?
Yeah, briefly, Everbrook, my housing co-op here in Hackney, we replaced our windows with double glazing, which everyone's really chuffed about in terms of saving energy, obviously, the major sort of bottom line. But we were, the co-op itself wanted to save future maintenance, cyclical maintenance costs, wanted to do everywhere in UPVC, but we were stopped by Hackney Council. There was a sort of a protection order on the properties. They said that we had to have wooden ones on the front of certain properties. In fact,
you're in a conservation area, aren't you, John?
We're in a conservation area. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Martin. Yes, we had to, we had to replace it with wood.
Yeah, Hackney hasn't covered the same problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I'll say on the matter.
Fair enough. Mike, you wanted to come in again?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, I was just going to give a warning about conservation areas, because we've had problems in my neck of the woods as well, that people were thinking all they needed to do in a conservation area was replace what everybody else would have. Oh, no, you don't. If it's double glazed, it's got to be double glazed in relationship to the aesthetics of the building in relationship to the conservation area. But this, we mentioned about minus 78% by the CCC by 2030. There is also a need for a mass retrofit campaign in the country, of which your properties, local council properties, everybody's properties needs to be dealt with, because one, that will save masses of energy cost, as many of you have indicated. It would also create vast numbers of jobs. And one of the things about the fallout from the pandemic is that we need to create large and positive jobs for the future. And, the amount of housing which needs to be done, upgraded and reducing of energy, etc., is, it is millions. And the sooner we start on that process, I think the better.
Wilfred, you're muted.
Sorry, I just want to come back on this fairy tale about listed buildings. I live on a grade 2 listed Millbank estate, and we had a long battle with City West Homes, claiming for 2 decades that they can't replace our old and falling out windows with double glazing. And I had an interesting conversation with English Heritage, who actually confirmed that grade 2 listed means that the landlord, the freeholder, can decide what's being done, and as long as it is within the keeping of the building, they can replace the windows with modern double glazing or triple glazing. English Heritage would just sign off what the landlord signs off. And I also subsequently spoke with the quantity surveyor of Westminster Council, who is specialized in heritage buildings, and he finally confirmed the same thing and just said the resistance is all down to money. So maybe that helps.
Was it ever thus?
Yes, yeah. Well, look, on that note, I'm sort of going to end the meeting. I will have a chat with our board, our exec, and we will see about setting up, devoting another forum entirely to this issue. I will arrange for certain documents, etc., see if I can get to be available to people. And hopefully I will see you at the next forum, which I think is sometime in June. It probably won't be the June forum, but I think the autumn forum would be the ideal time to discuss this just before winter sets in. But I should mention to people before I go and end this meeting, any members on low income, any residents on low income can claim from Thames Water a discount of a 50% discount from their heat and electricity suppliers, substantial payments. If you're over 65, I think you automatically get £200 towards your gas and electricity bill. If you're under 65 and your income is under certain thresholds, you can also get substantial amounts of money off on your bills. It's worthwhile pursuing that. I will post details again on the website and stuff about that. And with that said, hope to see you all next time. So have a good rest of the weekend. Cheers, everybody.